Hey, Sun Devils. Welcome back to our second week of the second semester. This is our week 20 notes, and I'm excited to be with you guys to help you learn everything that I can teach you about economics. Now, last week we kind of started off by talking about the fact that there is macroeconomics, where we try to look at the big picture of the economy, the GDP, the gross domestic product, and we'll look at unemployment rates and how that affects a country's economy or the global economy. In the year 2021, when I'm recording this, we're in the midst of globalization, right? Where there's such an interconnectedness. Last year, in the middle of the economics class I was teaching, we started hearing news reports about disease, an illness that was in China. And in class, we were talking about if China has a disease that's serious, obviously, and people can't go to work, it's going to affect, production. And who's the number one trade partner with China? The United States. How is this going to affect the United States and our economy? And we didn't realize at the time, of course, that disease was going to spread around the globe, and that many countries around the globe were going to choose to shut down different sectors of their society, and the economic impact that a pandemic was going to have on the world. And of course, today now we know all about COVID-19. And there are some serious health consequences, but people are also talking about the economic impact of something like a pandemic. So it's not just affecting people's health and livelihood, but it's also affecting their livelihood in the sense of, do they have a job? Are they going to become unemployed? Maybe now they're working from home. So those are some of like macroeconomic concepts that we will talk about in this class, but we'll deal with that at a later time. Things like supply and demand is a huge topic in an economics class. I'm choosing to start off this class talking more about microeconomics. And microeconomics are what causes us as an individual to make certain choices. Why do I buy certain kinds of food? Why do I live where I do? What kind of job do I have or am I going to have? These are the sort of topics. We could either look at that at, like, say, an individual business and why it makes certain advertisement choices, why it decides to diversify into different markets. So when we're talking about microeconomics, there's all kinds of individualistic choices and decisions and incentives and what motivates us to do certain things. But I like to spend my time, and the other teachers at Apple Valley High School like to spend their time in an economics class talking about personal finance. And that's such a huge topic because we want everyone in our school who are on the verge of becoming adults to understand financial literacy. Um, how can we make the study of economics relevant to students? Because all of you are going to enter the real world, like it or not, ready or not, here it comes. And there are so many things that we as teachers have learned over the course of our lives that we want to pass on to you. Little tiny things that sometimes we as adults, we think, oh man, I wish I would have known this. Or man, I hope to pass this knowledge on to students when they enter the real world. One of the things that makes you feel like an adult is when you purchase your first home. And there's so much paperwork. It's like the epitome of becoming an adult. Now, not that you have to own a home, you might choose to rent, but there was a ton of economic lessons I learned when I bought my first house. And the first house I bought was right here in Apple Valley. I was actually working down the hill at a different high school, Chino High School, but the housing market was so expensive down the hill that as a teacher, I couldn't afford that. And so my wife was pregnant with twins, right? So talk about feeling like an adult. Now I have to provide for for twins, and I already had two daughters. So we know that we couldn't live in an apartment. We needed to buy a home. And so that became like that huge step to really becoming an adult. And so just keeping that in mind, that's a lesson. Can you afford to live where you live? If you want to raise yourself up, here's some air quotes in economic status. Can you afford with the kind of job you have? Do you need more training? These are all kinds of choices that you're going to have to make as an adult, whether you have a family or not, right? But there's all kinds of things to keep in mind when you're buying a home. What's the neighborhood look like? What's the school district like where the home is? Some people buy a home because they look at the house and they think, oh, that looks nice. But real people who want to be effective, as an adult, have to look at the neighborhood and have to look at the health of the economy of the area and the school district where their potential kids were going to go to school, right? So there's all kinds of things to keep in mind when buying a home. And what's the strength of the nation's economy when you buy a house can affect how much you pay on that house for years to come. I don't know if you guys understand this, but I hope you'll write this down in your notes that most homes are set up on a 30-year loan. Now, as a high school student, most of you are 18 or on the verge of being 18 and becoming an adult. And trying to conceive of getting a loan for 30 years is impossible for you because you're not even 18 or you just barely turned 18. So how could you even imagine having to pay a loan off over the course of 30 years? 30 years. And what does an interest rate do to a loan that's 30 years long? If you buy a home for $200,000, I mean, what's the interest rate on that over 30 years at, say, 3 or 4%? And that's if your credit scores are good. There's also things like closing costs. When you're buying a house, somebody has to come in and appraise the house. That is, you have to have a professional evaluate the real cost of the house. You're going to have to put some kind of a deposit down. Okay. You might have to pay legal fees if there's a lien on the house. You might not even know what the word lien means. If the previous owner had bills against them that the government placed on it, then those liens have to be covered before the house can transfer ownership. What are mortgage fees? Most people know that if you're paying your mortgage, that means you're paying off your house slowly over 30 years. How much of your payment is going to the principal, the initial cost of the house, versus like the interest and fees? How much of it's going to escrow? What does escrow even mean? So these are things that people have to keep in mind when it comes to buying a home. And that might scare some people off. And obviously at 18, you're not going to be ready to, when you move out of your parents' house, you're probably going to get an apartment or maybe go to college and live in the dorms. So most people aren't going to run right out and buy a home. But these are the kind of things that as an adult, you're going to want to study and learn. And obviously, it's great having the internet to help you. But I know I learned a lot of economic lessons buying my first home. I bought my home, right around the time when the housing market was booming. And then in 2008, there was kind of like a stock market financial crash, and our economy in the country kind of took a nosedive and went into a recession for several years. And even though that's something that's global and it affected countries around the world, not just the United States, what happened to the housing prices is, let's just say, for instance, as an example, if I bought my house at $300,000 back in 2005, but then our economy hits a recession, then my house price might drop to like 150,000. So I don't know if you just heard this, but I borrowed money to buy a $300,000 home, but now it's only worth 150,000. But I still have to pay off the $300,000 loan even if the value of my house drops to 150,000. That's a reality. The opposite could also be true. You could buy a house for 150,000 and a couple years later the economy in the United States is booming, and no matter how much I'm earning per hour, no matter what my wages are, no matter what how I'm doing as my employment goes, the value of my house might go up to 300,000. So I might have made, here's some air quotes again, made $150,000 without doing anything. It's just the value of my house. So there's some serious lessons that could be learned, not just in buying a house, but understanding the housing market because it affects everybody, whether you realize it or not. If the value of houses is going down, that even if you're just renting, then rents might drop. But rents are not entirely controlled by the housing market. So, but it could fluctuate rents and how much you're paying just to rent. It might be cheaper to buy a home than to rent, depending if the value, the market value drops. So there's all kinds of economic lessons that could be learned from buying a home, and I certainly learned mine. Got some great videos in my notes. If we were in class, I'd show this to you. I highly encourage you to click on it. It's really funny. It kind of just reminds you as a high school student, are you ready for the real world? Are you ready to go out there and get that real job? And what kind of skills do you have? Again, as we talked about buying a home, one of the most important things is a credit score. So that's something you want to jot down in your notes. Credit scores determine to a certain extent what kind of things you can buy, large ticket items like a car or like a house. Even if you're going to rent, lots of times people will check your credit score. And if you don't have a credit score, you need to get involved in the financial world. So I hope that all of you as a senior, that you have a banking account, if you have a checking account and a debit card. If you don't, you really need to talk to your parents and get one of those things. Probably even set up a savings account so you can start to put some money away for big ticket items that you want, going to college, buying your first car. Eventually you're going to want some of those big ticket items like a house that's maybe 10 years off in your future, maybe not, maybe 5 years off. So you need to have open and active accounts in good standing. So even a simple checking account will start to build you credit score. When you move out and you get like your first place to live, even if you are with roommates, which is probably what's going to happen when you move out for the first time, you're going to want to make sure you have some utility bills in your own name. You don't ever put the utility bills just in one person's name. If you have roommates, you spread that out. When you get married, you make sure that both husband and wife have different utilities in your names. That way, you're both working on your credit score. The way you work on your credit score is to make sure that you turn your payments in on time, right? You have a diversity of credit accounts. We'll talk a little bit later about getting your first credit card, and you'll have to use that responsibly. And then, of course, when you buy your first car or something, you probably have to get like a co-signer because you probably won't have a lot of credit score. Make sure you pay your bills on time. Reduce your debt balances. If you have a ton of debt, then it's hard to get more debt, right? That what affects your credit scores. And if you get negative information on your report, you've got to make sure you take care of that because having a good credit score. So here's something I want you to write down in your notes. I'll probably put on one of the tests, like the midterm or the final. What is a bad credit score, if you're in the 300s, that's garbage. Garbage. You'll have a hard time buying anything, or if somebody does let you buy something, you're going to pay a really high interest rate. And if you don't know what interest rates are, when you borrow the original amount, say your first car is $5,000. If you have a loan on that $5,000, you're not just paying back the $5,000, you're going to also have to pay interest. And if it's at 12 or 15 or 18% on a car loan, well, take out your calculator and see how much extra money that's going to be. And then it depends if it's compounded interest or if it's a fixed interest. That can get rather complicated, but the simple version is you're going to pay a lot more than just the $5,000. So if you're sitting around, three or four hundreds, even 500s, you're not going to be getting good interest rates. If you're sitting up in the 700s or even into the 800s with a credit score, that's when you get people who give you like 0% interest loans because they know you're good for it. Credit score is like your credit reputation. Okay, so keep that in mind. If you're up in the 800s, that's really the best credit scores. Very few people are up in the 800s, but if you can be up in the 700s, you'll be good. You'll be getting good interest rates, and you'll be able to buy what you want. So these are a couple things that can help you boost your credit score or keep you in the right zone. Here are just some deep thoughts about personal finance. You don't get to choose whether or not you have to work for the rest of your life. All of us have to work for a living. What you do get to choose, you only get to choose what you'll be worth. Your skill equals what you're worth per hour. And some jobs are not hourly jobs. Some jobs are salary jobs. But what are you worth? That's something you do get to choose. If you've got no skills, you're going to be working for what is called minimum wage. And let me just put that into regular English for you. Minimum wage is the lowest amount of money that they can legally pay you. Is that what you're worth? I hope that you get a high school diploma. I hope you go on to college or to a trade school. Or maybe you have hookups where somebody will allow you to learn a skill so that you're worth more than minimum wage. But you don't really get to choose whether you work the rest of your life. You just get to choose what you're worth. Keep that in mind. Being rich won't make you happy, but being poor sucks. It causes problems in relationships. You're not, you have a hard time being able to afford things that bring you joy. And so economics can affect your mental health. It can affect your relationships, marriage, or with a partner. It affects so many aspects of who you are that understanding how personal finances work, but also making yourself worth more per hour so that somebody's willing to hire you. Or maybe you'll take that big risk. Where there's a lot of risks, there's a lot of rewards. But you could also either make it or break it. And that's where, people who are entrepreneurs, those people who, start their own companies and they're their own boss, they run their own business, they do have the potential of making it big. Okay? Biggest cause of divorce is financial conflict. So the more you know about personal finance and financial literacy and how the real world works, these are things that can help you later on in life and right now. It doesn't matter how much you make. It matters how much you spend. I think last week I kind of told you about a guy I knew who taught me a lesson right about when I was your age, where he showed, he was willing to tell me how much money he made per year. And he said, that doesn't sound like a lot, but we're smart with our money. And look at my house. And his house was nice. And he said, I'm happily married. My kids are all good. And we have a nice home. And then I have a friend, he says, this is my friend, he said, I have a friend who works as an airline pilot who makes six figures. That means over $100,000. And yet he's always in financial ruin. He's making three times as much, but he's making poor choices on the spending side. And so, of course, that's affecting his life. He's always in financial trouble, even though he makes more money. So it's not always about how much you make, it matters how much you spend. And those are some things that will affect your life. There's a lot of people that talk about the American dream. And when they talk about the American dream, they're talking about how successful they are financially. The belief that our nation should replicate America's democracy around the world. I guess that's kind of a government thing, but governments that allow the free exercise of economics, that allow people to make these capitalistic choices, where they support free trade, and they allow the free flow of ideas. Um, they have competition in the marketplace, and where the government is more hands off than hands on. That's what the American dream is: faith in a free market, right? Free flow of information and cultural ideas, right? The more freedom of expression we have, the more freedom of money we have, right? They tend to go together, okay? And the acceptance of the government protecting private enterprise and people allowing to own property. In the Declaration of Independence, it says that we believe that we have the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The actual original words that John Locke wrote, that Thomas Jefferson borrowed when he wrote the Declaration of Independence, says life, liberty, and property. So, really, that's what Thomas Jefferson meant when he said the pursuit of happiness. So, a government needs to support private property and people being able to own things, because that allows us to accumulate wealth at our own ingenuity, and not have the government control everything. Remember, the government should be the servant of the people, and that helps the economy to be successful. So keep those principles in mind. There is some crossover between the government and economics class. So let's talk about some specifics between buying versus renting. When you buy, you are making an investment. There's a key word I would highlight: investment. So if the value goes up, then you could be making money. The problem is if it's an investment, that investment could also drop. At the beginning of this lecture, these class notes, I talked about that whole concept of your house value could go up by a couple 100,000, or it could go down by a couple 100,000. And so ultimately, if you sold your house, or if you took out additional loans on the house, it could be worth more money. But remember, you have to pay back that original loan, or you go into bankruptcy. They could foreclose. That's some fancy word for you could lose your house. So the key is it's your responsibility. When you rent, the landlord is required to maintain and fix things. I always think it's easy that we still use medieval terminology when it comes to renting. What does that make the person who's renting? A peasant? We don't call them that, right? But anyways, we still use that old medieval terminology of the landlord, the person who actually owns the property. If you own your own home and something breaks, you've got to pay for it. If you're renting, then the landlord pays for it. But if there's huge maintenance costs, the rent price could change, right? And you would need permission to change things on the property. So if you're the owner, if you're the owner, you can make changes. You could remodel. But again, that's out of your pocket. But it could change the value of your home. If you upkeep your home, then you can keep the value high. If you're renting, then you're paying money for somebody else's property. You're paying for their investment. But also, if you're buying, it's all on you. It's all on your shoulders. So those are some of the that's kind of part of the microeconomics part of this. It's real stuff, but it's all about those choices. Why are we going to make this choice? Am I going to rent or am I going to buy? You got to think through the process. And if you're going to buy, there's somebody else involved, your partner, your wife, your spouse, your if you're not married but you're still buying with somebody else, it could be a bunch of buddies that you're going to buy a house with. So there might be more than one person making these decisions, and you've got to be involved in the communication there. Here's some fancy words you're going to want to pay attention to. Mortgage payment. Paying your mortgage is if you own a home. That's different than renting. So if you're paying off a home loan, remember if you bought a house for 300,000 and you had like a 4% interest rate over 30 years, you could pull out a calculator. It all depends on what kind of a loan you get, and that's where you have to read the fine print. But you could easily spend double the amount of money. In other words, if the house cost 300,000 over the course of 30 years, you could easily pay over $600,000 just because of the interest rates. Escrow is a certain amount of money with fees that are required to cover things like if you buy a home, you have to have homeowners insurance. And there's also something called property taxes. And so sometimes your mortgage company, that is the company you borrow the money from, they might keep an escrow account to make sure that they cover the insurance, to make sure that there's like, say, there might be like homeowners fees. Like certain neighborhoods have homeowner fees so that they keep the standard in the neighborhood up. That might also preserve the value of the homes in the area. So you have to pay attention if there's like homeowners fees. Even here in Apple Valley, there are certain neighborhoods that have homeowner fees. So escrow could cover things like fees. It could also cover, like I said, your homeowner's insurance. And there's different kinds of insurance for fire, for earthquakes, for property damage. And of course, the more insurance you get, the more it costs per month. And then, like I said, you've got to make sure you pay your taxes because there's certain laws that even if you own the home, but you don't pay your property taxes, you could lose your home, even though it's your home. So that's another one of those crossovers between the government and the economics of an area. Again, interest rates can be very different. It's not just the number, like you could have a 4% interest rates, but it could also be fixed or adjustable. If you get an adjustable rate, that means they could change it on you. They could change your interest rate over the course of 30 years. You might have started at 4 and then later it's to 6 or 8. And then there's also things like points that could be involved. I guess the point is this: it's impossible for me to go over everything in a lecture like this, but I want you to be aware of these things, and I need you to be able to know that you can ask trusted adults who have gone through the process before what to pay attention to. And if you're going to make a serious choice like that, hopefully you have parents or friends who can help walk you through it. Or you might need to literally go and do some research. But make sure you know what you're signing before you sign it. I kind of just talked about this right here, that there are homeowners associations that sometimes charge fees on homes. And that's something you have to take into consideration if you're buying a home. If you're renting, it's included in the rent generally. Sometimes they're called bylaws or homeowners association, but there are certain rules that you have to live by in your location. Like a homeowners association might say your house has to remain a certain color. They might say that you can't park certain vehicles on your property. Um, it really, like, these are real things that you have to pay attention to when buying a home. So again, that can be kind of scary, but that's like one of those steps into becoming a real adult. Pay attention to real estate agents. If you ever have to refinance your house, that's because Maybe when you first bought your house, your interest rate was at 6%, but say the economy is just kicking butt. I mean, like the global economy's kicking butt. And so interest rates might drop down to say like two. Well, if you got to 2%, you should jump on that. That's amazing. But if it gets to like something like 3%, that's a good place to be. 3 or 4% is what most Americans could expect to get to if you have good credit scores. And when you refinance, it's never free. Nothing's ever done for free. So if they say, "Hey, we'll refinance for free," that's not true. It's a business. They're making money somewhere. So they might be slightly increasing your interest rate over time. So that's where they make their money. Or they might charge you a closing cost. That's a couple $1,000s, like $5,000 up front for all the paperwork that has to get filed when you're buying a home. So if you guys have any questions about this, I'm happy to answer it in class. Um, One of the things that we're doing with this microeconomic financial literacy kind of thing is trying to help students remember the difference between needs and wants. Needs are expenses that are necessary to meet your day-to-day living, like food and shelter, right? So your rent or your mortgage, food, basic clothing, and I don't mean like brand wear, but like basic clothing, cleaning supplies, toiletry, or if you have kids, taking care of them. Transportation needs, whether you own a car or you're making payments on a car or you're using public transportation. Certain insurances are required by law. Some are you can make a choice on it, right? They're optional, but some are required. You have utilities like electric and gas and water and sewer, and there's certain taxes you've got to pay, right? And you have medical needs, right? There are other things that are wants, right? These are expenses that are not necessary to meet your day-to-day needs. These items are mostly based off of desires, right? So clothing and footwear, obviously you have to have clothing, but you don't have to have brand names, right? There's certain entertainments. People can kind of go out of control. They think it's a need, but it's really a want. Okay. There are certain things that are not even good for you that sometimes we choose to spend our money on. Um, so kind of look at this list, right? And kind of look at this list. And as you start to become an adult, remember what your needs are and what your wants are and where you can save money so that you can live this type of lifestyle you want. Okay? I really think this is an important lesson that all of us need to consider. What are the things we really need and what are the things we just want? The other big thing that kind of is one of the most essential things to being successful and transforming into an adult is buying a car. And you have to take into consideration, and again, this is the microeconomic side of class, where we're looking at what makes us choose certain things. When we're going to buy a car, are we going to get it new, or are we going to get it used? Or here's the quote that companies like to use: pre-owned. Obviously, a pre-owned vehicle is a used vehicle. It just sounds nicer. Um, but which one's a better deal? Some people love getting a new car, but the value of the car drops significantly once you drive it off the lot. Used cars are less expensive because somebody's already used the car. It's not new, and so the value of it's already dropped. So it might be more affordable. So again, you're making these choices. Do you need a car or do you just want a car? Well, Mr. Moore, if I want to go to work and have a job, I'm going to need a car. True, probably true. Okay. Some cities and places that people live, people don't need cars. There's some very successful people who don't own cars because they live in big cities and there's great public transportation. Okay. And if they really need to get somewhere, they might Uber it. And interestingly enough, if you're only using a car a couple times a month, maybe it's not worth it. We need transportation, but maybe we don't need a brand new car, right? That's the needs versus wants. When you're going to go buy a car, you might want to look at, say, the sticker price, or a lot of people use like the Kelly Blue Book, right? That's the value. So you can kind of get an understanding of how much value it is. Before you buy a car, you need to research things online and look at reviews from credible sources. Because there's certain cars that have good reputations and certain cars that have bad reputations. For buying a car, the interest rates, usually people get a 3-year loan, but actually, typically, nowadays, it used to be companies would do 3-year loans, but I've seen more and more companies doing 5-year loans. So before you buy a car, you might want to go to a bank. They might offer you a certain, hey, we can give you this interest rate. And you might go to a second bank. It's almost always good to go to multiple banks so that you're getting, you might get pre-approved a couple of loans. Shop around. Don't just take the first rate you get. But like my brother just bought a brand new truck. And when you buy a brand new truck, it could be 40, 50,000. And he said that he got a 7-year loan. Obviously, that would mean he's paying more interest rate over a longer term, so he'll pay more in interest, but it also means the monthly payments might drop. The shorter the loan, the more you pay per month, but the longer you stretch it out, the more you're paying in interest. I don't know if you just caught what I just said, but if you had a 3-year loan, you're going to pay more per month, but less in interest rates. If you have a 7-year loan, then you're going to pay less per month, so it might be more affordable for you or realistic, but you're going to pay more in interest over time. Okay, so that's the really important thing, is to pay attention to the interest rate and get pre-approved before you go shopping. You might want a certain car, but if you can't afford it, if no bank will give you a loan, or no dealership will give you a loan, then getting that particular car might be impossible. So don't overstretch yourself when buying a car. There's other things that they're going to ask you about when you buy a car from a dealership. If you buy it from somebody, like through a peer app, like people like Craigslist or like carguru.com. I mean, it kind of depends on where you're going to buy your car from. But if you buy it from a dealership, they're going to say, hey, do you want an extended warranty? Well, it's kind of a gamble. Should you pay up front, to kind of give yourself some insurance on your car being taken care of? Because every new car you buy is going to have a warranty on it, but you might get an extended warranty, but you're going to pay for that. You're going to pay several thousand for that. They might slap on something called prepaid maintenance. I bought a car one time and I didn't even realize what that was. And I ended up paying several $1,000s for prepaid maintenance. And I was like, I wish I would have known what that was. They might try to sell you an alarm system for it, and they might overcharge you. So you really got to pay attention. Hopefully you have people you trust who can help walk you through this process. Other things you might want to pay attention to, the newer your car is and the higher the value, the higher the insurance is on it, right? And the other thing you want to pay attention to is something like gas mileage. These are also kind of things you might want to pay attention to with the home. The bigger the home, obviously the more expensive, but the bigger the home, the more you're going to pay on utilities, like the more it's going to cost to heat the home. If you have a lawn, then the more you're going to pay in water bill. If you have a pool at the house, you're going to have a huge water bill. So there's these extra expenses that you've got to pay attention to. When dealing with a car, what's the gas mileage? Because you're going to pay, if it's a smaller car, you'll pay less every month in gas. If it's a bigger car, you'll pay more. And so you've got to factor that into where you're at economically. How far do you need to commute to work or school? Okay, because you're going to be paying for that. Also, you can pay attention to the type of car, because there's something called depreciation value. How much would your car be worth if you resell it? So, does this car hold a good value, or does it lose it over time? And of course, insurance rates. The nicer the car, the more you're going to pay per month in insurance. And you're required to have insurance, which is a whole nother topic. That's a whole nother topic to talk about insurance and the type of insurance. You never know when something's going to happen to a vehicle. True story. A couple weeks ago, I was driving on the freeway, on the highway, and a deer, I kid you not, a deer jumped in front of my car going full speed. My entire family was in the car, and my beautiful truck hit that deer square on the interstate, and everybody in the car was fine. Like we're all good, we're all safe, but my car was totaled. My truck. I'm glad it was a truck too, because a deer can do serious damage to a small car, and people die. So there's nothing I could do. The deer just jumped out in front of us while we were going full speed on the interstate, 75 miles an hour. Boom! We hit the deer. Poor deer died. Nobody in the car was hurt. But insurance, gratefully I have insurance. It's going to cover that car. The value of the car changes how much you pay. So you got to have insurance. Um, how do we determine the value of things? What is the real cost, and how much are we worth? Last week I kind of introduced this. I'm going to talk a lot about it the first couple weeks, but how much are you worth? And we'd always like to think that every human being matters, but we pay different human beings different amounts because we think that they're more valuable, and the more education and the more skills you have, the more you make. This kind of tells you how much you might make over a lifetime. I've chosen to get a master's degree. When I started becoming a teacher, that was the first thing I did. I graduated from college and got a bachelor's degree. Here's a true story. When I was going to college, I was making about $7-8 an hour. That was minimum wage at the time. And when I graduated and got my first job with a college degree, I was making more than $36 an hour. I went from $7 an hour to $36 an hour by getting a college degree. And then I got a master's degree. So now I get paid even more for doing the same job. Literally, being a teacher, I work the same number of hours, teach the same number of classes, but because I have a master's degree, I get paid more for doing the same job. So you really got to set yourself up to be successful in this world. What are some of the highest paying degrees, or highest paying undergraduate degrees? Undergraduate degrees would be like, say, bachelor's degree. This is kind of a little college lesson, but if you the first lowest level of degree you can get in college is an associate's degree. Let me just rewind the clock right here. This is an associate's degree. It means you've got a 2-year degree from a college, like a community college, probably. Um, you probably make more than if you have no college degree, but it's not really college graduation. College graduation is a bachelor's degree. Okay? A bachelor's degree is where you finished a program in a university. It's generally called a 4-year degree. It might take you longer than 4 years, it might take you less than 4 years, but they call it a 4-year degree. A master's degree is when after you're already graduated from college, so a graduate degree. And of course, a doctorate is the highest level of degree you can get. So this is just a little list, and you can go Google it. In fact, as we're starting to get into personal finances, one of the things we're going to do is do a little bit of like career research, and kind of looking at what type of lifestyle you want to have. Here's the lower end of the scale, right? Like, these are people who have college degrees. So just getting a college degree doesn't mean you're going to get paid more. It kind of matters what kind of degree. There's some students who go to college and they get like a philosophy degree, and they have a hard time getting a job. And I think, hey, if you're going to college and you're going to pay the money to get a college degree, don't get it in something fluffy that's not going to allow you to be employable. Okay. Last thing we're going to talk about is insurance. If you're buying a home or buying a house, insurance is going to be a major thing that you have to pay attention to. There's different kinds of insurance. Life insurance is optional, but life insurance is where you pay a monthly payment to an insurance company, and then if you die, your family, your wife, your kids get a certain amount of money, and you can set up term life insurance, or you can set up there's different kinds of life insurances. Term life insurance says for 5 years you're going to pay this amount of money, and if you die within that 5 years, we'll give you this amount of money. Then there's whole life insurances where they might you might be putting the money into an insurance company, and it kind of builds interest and becomes worth more over time, interestingly enough. And even if you don't die within the term limits, then you can pull money back out. So when you're buying life insurance, it's really important to pay attention to what you're looking at. But remember, life insurance is optional. Health insurance, there's different kinds of insurances. There's like HMOs or PPOs. PPOs give you more option and freedom to go to different doctors. HMOs cost less, but still cover just as much things. But it kind of depends on who your provider is. Okay. There's also some government programs. This is where the government's kind of stepped in, especially recently. And there are certain things like Medicare and Medi-Cal, and there's options if the company you work for doesn't provide health insurance for you. There are some government options out there. State law requires that all drivers have to have car insurance, but there's different levels. There's liability coverage, and then there's collision coverage, and then there's comprehensive coverage. Then there's also uninsured motorist insurance. So when you're buying car insurance, you legally have to have insurance, but the amount of money you pay per month can greatly depend on how much coverage you want. Obviously, the more coverage you want, the more you pay per month. And so those are some of the things you're going to have to pay attention to. The other thing you need to keep in mind is, as a high school student and even as a college student, you can often get lower rates if you have good grades, because then they know you're a responsible type of person. I've kind of already talked about this, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but with homeowners or homeowners insurance, there's different kinds. There's also renters insurance. That's true. If you're renting, you can still get some of your stuff covered. But you pay for different things. Like everybody has to have like fire insurance. Earthquake insurance is kind of optional though. You don't have to, but if you want to, it kind of depends on how close you are to an earthquake zone. If you live in California, maybe you want to consider that, right? There's other kinds of insurance, things like vision insurance, right? To help cover exams, glasses, or contacts. There's dental insurance. And sometimes jobs provide these fringe benefits. Like as a teacher, they give us a little bit of life insurance. It's not a ton, but they give us some. And I don't have to pay for that out of pocket because I have a college degree and I have a professional job. The school district gives us some life insurance. They give us health insurance. They give us vision insurance and dental insurance, right? So that I can take my kids to get, cleanings and cavities taken care of, and even some orthodontic work, and get their wisdom teeth taken out. So it's not just how much you're getting paid per hour, but if you want to have a job that has some of this coverage, you got to make sure you get yourself some education. This is weird, but there's even things like unemployment insurance. So if you lose your job or you get hurt on the job, they'll pay some of the bills, right? Here is a good goal to have. get a job with fringe benefits. That's what I'm talking about. Like my job as a teacher, I get some of these things covered. So that's a lot of stuff to soak in. If you've got questions, I hope you bring it to class. Here's my learning goal for the second week of the semester. Students will understand that effective decision making requires comparing the additional costs of alternatives with the additional benefits. Remember, there's always a cost to everything. And when you're making these adult decisions, they can be difficult, but you've got to weigh out what you really care about and what's going to benefit you the most. Most choices involve doing a little more or less of something. Few choices are all or nothing decisions. Um, as with every week, there are some videos that you could check out. You could also go on YouTube and find 1,000 other ones. If you're going to buy a car or a house, you're going to want to do some serious research. So thank you for being here. This is week 20 financial literacy. We'll see you guys next week.